Welcome everyone to Enhancing Caregiver and Community Support for Children's Reading Development Outside of School. We're so happy to have you here today. So thank you, Vinod. Thank you, Megan, Cassandra, Jackson. So nice to see all of you today. My name is Carrie Stout, International Project Coordinator with the Education Development Center, working under the Global Reading Network. I'm thrilled that you're able to join us today to discuss caregiver and community support for reading and the many factors and examples we've gathered around this topic. This is a reminder that we are recording today's event. Before we get started, I have a few reminders. First, auto closed captioning is available in English. To access it, please click the CC icon. You can also click on the globe icon to access the English channel and interpretation in French and Spanish. If you don't see either of those icons, they might be hidden with 3 dots and a button that says More, and then you'll be able to see them. Please use the chat feature today to add comments and questions whenever you'd like, and if you haven't already done so, please introduce yourself in the chat. To preserve bandwidth, we ask that you please turn your camera off for our whole group session and mute your microphone when you're not speaking. We will have one speaker today speaking in French, so if you would like to hear all of the audio in English today, please make sure you select the English channel now. We have 2 objectives for today's web event. First, we want you all to walk away with an understanding of why caregiver and community support for reading development is important. Second, you will understand how to access and use the synthesis report and case study examples to design community-based literacy programs. I'm so excited to be with you all here today, and we have our consultants on the project, Kathleen Denny, Stephen Richardson, and Laura Galley. We also have representatives from Chemonics International and Save the Children, who will share their 3 case studies that are part of the Knowledge Product series. And with that, I will pass it over to Kathleen Denny to kick us off today. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks Carrie. So I'm going to start us off by providing a quick overview of the synthesis report, beginning with a rationale why it was written. So one of the first reasons is that USAID identifies out-of-school literacy support as a major component for increasing children's learning outcomes in reading. And this is highlighted in USAID's Reading Matters framework. Next, research shows that involving parents, community members, and volunteers in student learning has been significantly associated with positive increases in the academic skills of children, especially as it relates to fluency and comprehension. So with that being said, because of this prioritization by USAID and the evidence from the research, the synthesis report was included in USAID's Global Reading Network Knowledge Product Series under the Leading Through Learning Global Platform in order to provide evidence-based guidance for practitioners when designing programs that increase learning outcomes and our caregiver and community engagement in literacy outside of school. So the synthesis report is based on one overarching research question, which is highlighted in blue on the slide. And that is, what factors are critical for ensuring that all readers from the pre-literacy through advanced literacy phases have the supportive environments and resources necessary to practice literacy outside of school? And underneath that research question, we have 2 sub-questions that we were also looking to answer. And the first one is, what are effective and sustainable strategies for community engagement and behavior change in supporting reading at home and in the community? And what are promising practices in community and volunteer-based approaches to supporting literacy development outside of school? So now I'm going to pass it over to Laura, and she'll continue walking you through the content of the synthesis report.
Great, thanks, Kathleen. So I will now provide a quick overview of the methodology used to develop the synthesis report. So the report combines research from several activities, including a desk review and the collection of promising practices. For the desk review, our team identified and included both peer-reviewed and gray literature that was published within the last 10 years. So this included 159 studies that focused on programs or interventions that support literacy outside of a formal learning environment. The Education Development Center then put out a call for promising practices, which was advertised through the Global Reading Network, and the call requested submissions to address the research questions and to demonstrate evidence of improved student learning outcomes or increased caregiver engagement. As a result, we received 28 submissions from a wide range of local and international organizations. From those submissions, our team then selected 11 promising practices to include in the synthesis report that show evidence of learning outcomes and/or community engagement outcomes related to literacy programs implemented outside of school. And then from those 11, the author selected 3 promising practices to further develop into case studies. So this synthesis report provides 11 evidence-based interventions that engage caregivers and community members to support pre and emergent through upper primary readers outside of school. So several examples include home learning activities and caregiver skill building activities, and we will go over the full list of interventions in just a few minutes. For each intervention, the synthesis report provides an overview, guidance for planning and monitoring and evaluation, and example programs. And the synthesis report also outlines critical factors to consider in the design of each intervention, which are the conditions that can influence the success of the intervention or overall program. And these critical factors were identified by the desk review. And programs reviewed in the synthesis report often include a suite of interventions that complement each other and address more than one critical factor. So for example, in contexts where there's a lack of culturally and linguistically relevant children's books, book distributions, both physical and digital, are common. However, simply addressing the supply of reading materials may not address other critical factors that affect children's literacy. So for example, in Egypt, the Literate Village Project addresses caregiver literacy by providing literacy classes for adults in combination with book distributions and home learning activities for children. And I will now pass it on to my colleague, Stephen, to continue.
Thanks, Laura. So throughout that synthesis report, we created an operational framework really to orient practitioners and readers of the synthesis report on the kinds of interventions that can support children's literacy outside of school. So the operational framework categorizes the interventions in 3 categories from the Venn diagram. So the first category is this home learning environment, right? So interventions where practitioners implement programs to support family literacy at home. We have caregivers' literacy abilities, children's interest in literacy, and potentially also increase the availability of reading materials at home. And the second area is the community spaces. And these are really those interventions where practitioners use these community spaces, such as community libraries, to provide children with regular access to reading materials, as well as literacy-related interventions and activities. Thirdly, in the gray circle, we have community events and activities. So these are interventions where practitioners are implementing community events and activities to promote reading through awareness campaigns, through information sessions, and literacy skill building interventions for children, as well as caregivers and community members. So the operational framework shows that some of these interventions can actually occur in more than one area of implementation, showing that there's intersectionality of these interventions across different areas, as well as what's really exciting is the flexibility that practitioners have to implement these sorts of activities that are evidence-based to support children's literacy. And as you'll see from our case studies later today, many practitioners decide to do more than one intervention. So really a suite of intervention to really address multiple barriers to literacy development. And so you can see from the diagram, we have quite a few different interventions there. So you can really address caregiver literacy. You can provide books in different avenues, as Laura just mentioned. We have non-formal education activities, which we'll hear about later on, and even book clubs and reading camps, all these have evidence really in supporting children's literacy outside of the home. And we're going to move on to really thinking about how do we use the synthesis report. So Kathleen, in just a moment, we'll go over what we have developed as the critical factor analysis tool, just highlighting what are the barriers to literacy development in that context. And it really identifies those interventions that really address those barriers, whether it's access to materials or caregiver literacy, children's interest in reading, different kinds of factors, right? And then number two, really kind of selecting those interventions or a suite of interventions that are evidence-based to address those critical factors in that context. And thirdly, there was a rather robust section on monitoring, evaluation, and learning outlined in the synthesis report that identify different indicators, measurement tools, and even research questions that can support the improvement and measurement of the literacy programs moving forward. I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen now, who's going to provide a little bit more on that critical factor analysis tool. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Great, thank you, Stephen. So Stephen already kind of mentioned the critical factor analysis tool, but I'll provide a little bit more detail. So this is kind of a needs assessment tool / planning tool. The way that practitioners can use it is that they can look at their context and pick 2 to 3 critical factors that they want to analyze. And once they select those critical factors, then we have provided a list of questions that they can consider for each of the critical factors. And we recommend that they bring together a group of stakeholders that represent different aspects of the context in order to help answer these questions. And once they have a good picture of kind of the critical factors and each of these different answers, they can then identify which interventions would be best for the context. And we have a column on the right where you can see a list of recommended interventions. So stakeholders can kind of work together to figure out what would work best. As Stephen mentioned several times, oftentimes these programs include a suite of interventions. So they'll often choose more than one intervention to address each critical factor. So that's an overview of the critical factor analysis tool. And now I'm going to pass it back to Carrie.
Thank you, Kathleen and team. I'm very excited about this critical factor tool and the synthesis report overall. We'd love to take a few minutes to answer any questions you may have at this point about the synthesis report or any of the other research going into it. Please click on the link in the chat to answer our Q&A space today. You'll see a column called Synthesis Report, and if you have a question, go ahead and add it under the column by clicking on the plus sign. We can show a screen share of that space. That would be really helpful. So there you go. There on the screen is what the space will look like if you click on that link, and you can add the plus sign underneath each topic. Right now, we're just on the synthesis report section, and you can answer any of your questions there. If you're joining from your phone and you don't have access to this right now, you can please put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A function in Zoom. Great, I see some questions being put on there. I can answer the first one, that when the report will be released. It hasn't quite been released yet. It is finalized and it should be released soon. If you have registered for this event today, you will get an update via email of when that report is released. Could we scroll down a little bit so I can see? Great. What was the data collection process for this report? Kathleen or Stephen or Laura, would you like to take that one?
Sure, so I can give a quick overview. So we conducted a desk review first, and we looked at a mixture of gray literature and reports that were published by different organizations. So we started off with the desk report. or the desk review. And then we also collected case studies from different promising practices from different organizations that responded to a call for promising practices. And then we basically took our findings from the desk review and our findings from the call for promising practices, and then developed the synthesis report to kind of represent all of our findings.
Great, thank you. The question that always happens is sort of the next two. How can you show which interventions are the most effective? Would someone from your team like to tackle that one?
Yeah, I think from my side, those next two questions are sort of related. This is why we found the critical factor analysis tool quite important, because number one, not all contexts are the same, and number two, not all evidence rigor is the same, right? And so sometimes you might see a randomized control trial, other times you might just see a comparison of time using standard tools like EGRA, right? And so, so when we look at what's most effective or the evidence of improved reading outcomes, we did have some sort of bare minimum of what was required as actually evidence. So we developed that, but then thinking about to support what, right? And so, and for example, in Egypt, which you'll hear, one of the key critical factors was caregiver literacy to support their children. And when there are a lot of mothers had low or were illiterate in very rural areas, that was the critical factor that needed to be almost to be addressed first in that specific context. And so I guess the answer is it depends, but that's why we felt that the critical factor analysis tool was so important to then identify which were the effective interventions for that critical factor. Back to you, Carrie.
Great, thank you. That's always helpful. The next one, will the report discuss which intervention works best for caregivers and whether those have impacts on children's development?
It's a great question. So we were looking at two kind of levels of evidence. First was student learning outcomes, and we're primarily looking at formative or assessment results, so like ACER and EGRA type data. But then we're also looking at increases in community engagement. So for caregivers, we were only looking at engagement numbers. We were not looking at well, I guess we did to some extent look at changes in caregiver practices with in their interactions with children. We did look at a couple of like CAP surveys results and things like that, but it was primarily looking at just increases in engagement. So that's something that was a little bit of a gap and could be definitely further researched. I would say that there was a bit of a gap in terms of data on the caregiver side. Most of the data was student facing. So that's something to note.
Definitely an area for future research. All right, I think we have time for one more, but if your question wasn't answered in this time, please don't fret. We will answer it either later on in the presentation, or we can also answer it via the comments on the Padlet. Our last question for this section, I'm going to choose, how long does the literacy support last for parents for it to work? Another tough question.
Well, I think this goes back to it depends. It depends on where the parents' literacy levels are and what other is preventing them or supporting them, rather, to also build those literacy skills. So yeah, it depends. I mean, I think we all can agree that developing literacy in any new language or literacy from the beginning does take some time. However, the benefit of adults is that there is a way in which they could prioritize their time accordingly. They can focus on specific tasks. So there's positives and negatives of learning a new language later on versus as an early childhood, which we didn't go into that evidence specifically. But having said that, there is levels of agency that exist for parents that can really support and fast track some of that literacy development. But so how long is it depends, but I mean, I think we do see that with the right kind of support, which we'll hear about later from Literate Village, parents can really do that and take it on. And we see different changes, not only in their own lives, but also in their children's lives, which is super important. Back to you.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we will move on for right now, but please do keep that Padlet open so that if you have any other questions corresponding to the columns for our 3 case studies, please go ahead and add them throughout this presentation. I will now turn it over to our first case study presenter, Jihan Abdel Sayed from Save the Children. Jihan, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Carrie. This is Jihan, the Technical Director at LV. I will start by explaining the objective of the project, which is to ensure that women and children enrolled in community schools, and these schools, by the way, they exist in rural areas where there is a good high literacy rate among the parents as well. So we focus on those children and their mothers, and it's not only about literacy skills, but also life skills and to ensure continuous learning and self-improvement. And this project came in line with the government of Egypt priorities like reducing adult literacy, especially in rural areas, and also providing quality education to children, especially the Arabic literacy. So as I said, that a good percentage or high percentage of illiterate women, they are in rural areas where the project operates. That's why the project adopted a holistic approach to improve literacy skills for adults and children. And when I say a holistic approach, it's about that we implement a wide range of integrated activities that targets the whole family, and because we see the family as a unit of change leading to literate village. So with children, we focus on providing them with support either inside the school by training teachers, improving teaching practices, resources, devices, and all of that. And outside the school, we also support them by implementing activities like summer camps and reading clubs, as you can see on the slide, where they can learn in a fun environment away from the school setting. And with mothers at home where illiteracy is high, we start with her a journey of 15 months where she learns Arabic, math, and life skills, parenting skills, and many other skills. This journey also is it's divided into 2 pieces. The first one is the curriculum, adult literacy curriculum, followed by post-literacy, where to enhance and maintain the newly acquired skills. Then we in the middle of the project, we invited or added an activity targeting fathers, so they are not left behind. This is to raise the awareness of the fathers and husbands in order to be more supportive to the change that's happening and learning of their kids. And we do all of these activities in full partnership with the community education team, which is a group of volunteers at the community level. And with them, we do a lot of awareness raising activities, reading campaigns, and all of that in order to have an enabling environment at the community level as well. And we set foundations to sustain the impact of the project at the community level by setting foundations like building capacity of our partners, either governmental or non-governmental, the NGOs working with us. So by saying that, the project started back in 2017, which gave us an opportunity to do impact assessment, and the evaluation activities we did proved that our interventions and this holistic approach is getting significant results on the level of the literacy skills of mothers and children as well. And also the evaluation activities proved that there is a strong association between the literacy of the mothers and also their level of support to the children learning and improving even the learning environment at home in general. And also it proved that those households involved or engaged in LV activities the home literacy environment activities were observed to be higher than those in the comparison group where families are not part of the LV work. And I'll stop here. There's a lot to say about LV, but I'll stop here and leave you with the short video about a wonderful mother from Asyut Governorate, where it shows the impact on her life and her family.
قبل ما اروح الفصل طبعا ما كنتش اعرف اتحاور مع العيال ولا اعرف مشاكلهم ولا اعرف ان هم بقوا مستواهم في المدرسه ولا كنت مستهميه بيهم. يعني هم عيال بكره يكبروا ويتعلموا من نفسهم. لكن لما اول ما رحت الفصل عاد وخدت المحو الاميه دي عند الابله صباح بقيت اعرف عاد اقرا واكتب واعلم ولدي. عرفت ايه الصح من الغلط، يعني كيف اجاوب مع ولدي، اعلمهم، البسهم كويس، ياكلوا الاكل الصحي، كيف يحافظوا على نفسهم.
انا بروح المدرسه عشان اتعلم واعلم اخواتي.
ايمان وورده في مدارس المجتمع ما ييجوا اقعد اقرا معاهم، نقرا قصص، نتعلم. شايفة المهم تعليم للبنات عشان بس الست لها شأن ولها مستقبل برضه. تعلم هيفتح مخهم، هيخليهم يفكروا، هيشوفوا ايه المستقبل. هي لو قعدنا مثلا مش هنكمل تعليمنا ما يبقاش لنا مستقبل، هنتجوز وخلاص قاعدين ستات في البيوت. هم لما تتعلموا هتعرفوا تطلعوا بره، تعرفوا تربوا عيالكم.
تعليم مهم للبنت انه يعني تعرف اي كلمة تعرف تقريها، ومثلا اي بلد اي حاجه تعرف تروحها، تعرف تتكلم بلغتها، وان اي بنت يعني تكون مهتمه بدراستها لانه ده تنفعها في المستقبل.
ايوه، هم اساسا المجتمع مبني على الستات، هم اللي جايين دور مهم، هم اللي لمين الاسره.
Thanks for listening to my presentation, and I think I'll pass it to Valerie.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you, Jihan. My name is Valerie Power, and I am a senior director at Commonix International. I was the director for the Lecture pour tous, or Reading for All activity in Senegal, which ran from 2016 through 2021. With our partners Plan International and the Senegalese organization ARED, we facilitated and tested a package of family and community engagement activities that promoted the country's major early grade reading reforms. For a bit of quick context, these family and community engagement activities were part of larger efforts to introduce these reading reforms at a large scale. You can see from some of the numbers on the slides here, some of the successes and impact. As for the very first cohort of students, reading outcomes jumped from a baseline of only 0.3% reading at grade level to 30% just after 2 years. We implemented the family and community engagement component of these efforts in a random sample of 20% of all the school communities in 6 of the target regions, allowing for robust testing to detect any effects that would be attributed to these activities on top of other reform efforts. Our family and community engagement package comprised a comprehensive strategy designed to increase the demand or the voiced expectations of parents, caregivers, and others in the community that their children learn to read and read to learn by grade 3. The strategy was also designed to play a greater role to support the achievement alongside the school. to follow along to see if the students were achieving and taking more action if needed when they don't. We drove these strategies through a robust learning agenda that helped us adjust along the way and measure the overall impact of the package. I will now turn it over to Rokaya Tion, a former Plan International Family and Community Engagement Specialist, to explain more on our strategy and its results. Rokaya will be speaking in French with simultaneous translation to English available in the English language interpretation channel. If you are not already in the English channel, please click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. Or if you do not see a globe icon, please click on the round circle with 3 dots and then select interpretation. Please select English. Okay, thank you everyone. I'll now hand it over to Rokaya.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup Valérie. Je m'appelle Rokaya Tion, j'étais la responsable de la composante engagement parental et communautaire dans le cadre du programme Lecture pour tous, développé par Chemonix sous le coupole de plan international. Donc, pour obtenir les résultats dont Valérie parlait tout à l'heure, nous avons travaillé avec le ministère de l'Éducation nationale et d'autres acteurs pour concevoir donc un programme d'engagement des familles et des communautés dans le cadre d'une approche systémique école-communauté. Ça visait un peu à améliorer la lecture initiale des enfants. Les membres de la communauté et les familles ont été formés donc pour soutenir un peu tout ce qui se faisait à l'école par les enseignants. Vous pouvez voir ici quelques activités qui se sont imbriquées. Ce sont des activités qui montrent un peu l'approche globale que nous avons développée à travers des activités telles que des forums communautaires, telles que des campagnes de sensibilisation, telles que des formations, des radios, des messages que vous voyez. Donc, ce qui est plus important dans tout ça, c'est ce que vous voyez. Vous pouvez voir à droite, sur votre droite, c'est un outil qui s'appelle l'outil école-maison. C'est cet outil école-maison-là qui vraiment était quelque chose de très important pour le programme parce que ça permettait de développer la communication entre l'école et les familles. Les enseignants faisaient des évaluations tous les 15 jours de manière très simple pour montrer aux parents si les enfants avaient des possibilités avaient des compétences en lecture, de phrases, de mots, de syllabes, etc. Alors, ça, si on avait, par exemple, si on a cette possibilité-là, next, allez-y, sur le prochain slide, vous allez voir que sur le prochain slide, tout à l'heure, vous allez voir que si l'enfant arrive à avoir des difficultés, des mobilisateurs communautaires ont été engagés par les comités de gestion des écoles pour développer ce qu'on appelle des plans d'action de soutien à la lecture des enfants. Et il était en mesure de développer vraiment des visites à domicile. Vous allez découvrir peut-être sur la vidéo tout à l'heure ce que le travail que faisait le mobilisateur communautaire pour aider les comités de gestion des écoles. Allez-y.
LPT a mis à la disposition véritablement de l'école beaucoup de moyens, en dehors de la pédagogie, en dehors de la structuration des apprentissages, que j'aime beaucoup cette pédagogie de répétition, de modélisation. Mais il faut aussi dire qu'il y a eu beaucoup de livres, mais c'était intéressant de voir comment cet enfant-là, qui est bien encadré en classe, comment aussi cet enfant-là puisse être suivi à la maison. Donc du coup, ce relais communautaire a beaucoup contribué à améliorer les performances des élèves. Mais avec le relais communautaire, c'est une personne, en fait, quelqu'un qui accompagne et qui est issu de la communauté. Et vous voyez davantage, surtout, cette possibilité de voir comment les parents doivent s'impliquer afin de booster les performances des élèves.
Prochain slide. J'avais oublié de dire tout à l'heure que ce programme était développé avec des supports en langue nationale. Les parents étaient en mesure d'accompagner les enfants parce qu'ils comprenaient la langue sur laquelle ils devaient parler. Donc, ce qui nous intéresse globalement, l'ensemble des interventions que nous avons menées dans le cadre de cette approche systémique école-communauté pour améliorer la lecture initiale des enfants a permis d'obtenir des résultats que vous voyez ici. Si on prend par exemple l'exemple des clubs de lecture, 18 000 clubs de lecture ont été organisés par des communautés pour aider les lecteurs en difficulté. Il y avait aussi des coins de lecture qui étaient créés un peu partout avec 66 000 supports en fait, de lecture précoce qui ont été distribués, dont 2100 presque parents et tuteurs qui ont participé vraiment à des causeries, à des discussions communautaires pour améliorer la lecture initiale des enfants. Et là, si vous regardez un peu le prochain slide, c'est notre dernier slide. Next. Vous allez voir comment nous avons fait pour vraiment avoir l'impact de ces programmes-là, de ces interventions-là dans le cadre du travail que nous avons fait dans Lecture pour tous. Alors, ce qui nous a permis tout d'abord de faire un peu l'enquête CAP. L'enquête sur les connaissances, les attitudes et les pratiques ont permis de relever certains éléments. Ici, par exemple, nous avons constaté que les parents participent davantage aux activités de soutien à la lecture des enfants. C'est ce qu'ils ont noté dans le cadre de cette évaluation, qu'ils étaient nombreux à penser qu'ils pouvaient aider les enfants à lire. Et effectivement, ils aidaient les enfants à lire à la maison. Deuxièmement, vous allez voir que le soutien, en fait, le mécanisme d'évaluation qui était développé par RFMail, l'évaluateur Mathematica a utilisé l'analyse bayésienne pour déterminer l'impact tiré des enseignements et qui ont vraiment bénéficié de ces interventions-là. Ils ont fait la comparaison entre 20% des écoles avec d'autres écoles qui n'avaient pas subi cette intervention-là. Et en dernier, ce qui est intéressant, vous allez voir que dans le cadre de RFMail, l'ensemble des interventions, ils ont retenu et constaté que l'ensemble des interventions avaient effectivement modifié le comportement à la maison des enfants et que les membres des familles ont vraiment participé et développent des communications entre l'enseignant et le parent. Et du coup, même les pratiques des enseignants étaient un peu changées. Le plus important encore, c'est qu'ils ont constaté que les enfants arrivaient à lire des lettres, des mots, des lettres, des syllabes et des mots. Et pour l'instant, ce que nous pouvons dire, c'est que le ministère de l'Éducation nationale actuellement est en train de continuer cette expérience-là dans le cadre de sa réforme pour vraiment introduire les langues nationales et utiliser tout ce que Lecture pour tous a pu créer comme activité et comme outil. Je vous remercie de suivre cette intervention-là. Merci beaucoup.
Hi, everybody. This is Tim Murray from Save the Children US. It's great to be here. So I'm going to be talking about catch-up clubs. Catch-up clubs are Save the Children's community-based remedial education approach, inspired by teaching at the right level. We focus on children in grades 3 to 5 who are behind expected levels for their grade. Our goal is that all children participating are able to read and understand a simple text by the end of a 3-month cycle. The program consists of 3 key steps as we're teaching at the right level: a learning diagnostic to place children in leveled groups, intensive reading clubs in rounds of about 10 to 15 sessions over 2 or 3 weeks, and a follow-up assessment to monitor progress and make sure children are still getting support at the right level. So this means of a total of about 35 sessions over the course of 2 to 3 months. So I'd emphasize that catch-up clubs prioritizes students who are furthest behind in their reading. These students can often feel demotivated and unconfident in school. For this reason, we've also found that integrating play-based and social emotional learning activities can be vital. These children often also experience poverty and protection risks. So we've also emphasized the links to child and social protection programs as part of catch-up clubs. So if we go to the next slide, I'd like to emphasize as well that at the core of catch-up clubs is really working through and with communities. So we understand the importance of teaching at the right level within the school system, but we think that the communities also have a vital role to play in remedial education. So the reasons for working outside of the school hours are multiple. Children in low resource contexts spend limited time in class and actually even less time on task. So it makes sense to try and harness the great amount of time they spend outside of school. The model also allows us to have a more targeted and equity-focused support to smaller groups of children who need a bit more support in a more intimate and encouraging environment than they find in the classroom. It finally looks to harness the potential and enthusiasm of communities, caregivers, and youth to support education. While volunteerism has been really common in the health sector and very effective, communities and caregivers are also a key part of the education system, but their capacity to support learning is not often fully harnessed. So catch-up clubs is one great way to do that. I'll hand over to Maya, who will talk about some of the results of the approach in different countries.
Thank you, Tim. I'm Maya Gordon, Research and Evidence Advisor for Education at Save the Children. First developed in 2020 during the pandemic, catch-up clubs have since been implemented in 12 countries, reaching over 65,000 children. The results have been very promising. We see globally that after participating in catch-up clubs for just 3 months on average, at least 70% are able to read sentences and over 50% are able to read a paragraph with comprehension. We have had 6 impact evaluations finding very positive impacts ranging from 0.5 to 1 standard deviations. We have also seen additional impacts of social and emotional learning and cash transfers on learning outcomes in reading. We'll see on the next slide the qualitative findings with community learning facilitators and children. A major recurrent theme in the qual aspects of the evaluations in the Philippines, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Malawi was that children appreciated the play-based facilitation provided by the volunteers. Other themes were children feeling well encouraged by volunteers who are said to be patient and friendly, and the contrast with the less positive experience of formal school in some cases. I'll hand you back to Tim to learn more about the catch-up clubs in El Salvador.
Thanks, Maya. So I'll be stepping in for my colleague, Oscar, who sadly couldn't join us today. But the project in El Salvador was implemented firstly last year in about 75 schools in the municipalities of Sonsonate and La Paz. Schools, families, and community development associations, known as ADESCOs, participated in the project together with Save the Children. Students with reading and maths and learning needs were identified invited to participate across schools. And through the ADESCOs, we identified volunteers, and the ADESCOs also provided the physical spaces, community centers where the clubs were run. So the volunteers were really, and the ADESCOs were really at the heart of the project. If you go to the next slide, you can see here the common profile and key characteristics of these community learning facilitators. They were people who lived in the community, people who were recommended by the ADESCO or the schools. They would need to have reading skills at around high school level and the ability to work with children. They also did need the flexibility and time to be able to support the clubs. So many of the volunteers were mothers and fathers, grandparents, ADESCO leaders, unemployed university and high school graduates, unemployed or retired teachers, and students who are in night university. The volunteers kind of assessed their own skills and were provided training and coaching throughout the project. So this final slide will show our kind of vision for scaling up catch-up clubs in El Salvador moving forward. So while this Adesco volunteer model has been really fantastic, it is a very time-consuming, complex process to make work at scale. So part of the USAID Learn to Shine project, we've been working with the Ministry of Education to co-plan a scale-up model for this approach. So there's two ways that we're looking to do this. Firstly, we're working with teacher training universities to include the catch-up clubs as part of their teacher practicing experience. So the idea is that universities will be embedding this in their pre-service university curriculum, and this could be scaled at national level. This is already taking place with 3 universities in El Salvador. The second model that we'll be exploring over the next couple of years is to work through high schools and have high school students facilitate the clubs as part of their compulsory social service hours. So by the end of 2027, we should have 10,000 more students in 500 schools participating in catch-up clubs. Thank you very much. I'll hand back over. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters. We've got a lot of information and a lot of questions to dig into, so I'm excited. All right, we are going to head back to our Q&A space. Please don't forget to add your question under the corresponding column by clicking the plus sign under each column in the Padlet. And I'm going to try to keep it even and take turns here. So we're going to start back with Jihan from Literate Village, then we'll go to Lecture pour tous and then catch-up clubs, and then continue on that way so that we hopefully get a variety of questions. My first question for Literate Village is going to be sort of a combination of a few questions about the roles of men and women in the project. So what were the roles of men and women in the project? How did you disaggregate the data? And then how did you identify men and women for these classes? That will be my first question. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. We identify women and men for the project. Is the starting point is children enrolled in community schools. So we are targeting the parents of those children. That's how we identify women and men. And this aggregation of data, the project originally targeting mothers and women. So fathers or men are not a target group in the original design of the project. We added this activity that targets fathers later, like in the middle of the project, just because from the evaluation activities and learning activities we did, we found that their role is crucial to enhance and support the learning, the change that's happening at the household level. That's why we added that activity that targets the fathers. We, in our database, of course, we capture all the data about the involvement of fathers and mothers in our activities in general. Is there anything I didn't respond to?
I think you got it. Thank you, Jihan.
Yeah.
All right, the Lecture pour tous team, Rukaya. We had quite a few questions about the change in the level of support and the gains from parents in the program. Can you speak about the baseline level of parental literacy before the intervention, and then the change, both how it came about and what the change was for parental involvement? Thank you. Rukaya, are you still there? Or Valerie, are you able to come off mute?
Oui, je suis là. OK, là, pour répondre un peu à cette question-là, il y a eu, je vous disais tout à l'heure, qu'il y a eu une évaluation dans le cadre de l'enquête sur les connaissances, les attitudes et les pratiques. Et là, les parents ont été interrogés et les parents, je disais tout à l'heure, même qui n'étaient pas alphabétisés, arrivaient à aider les enfants à lire. Rien qu'à entendre l'enfant parler avec les sons, avec les images qui étaient faites, parce que n'oublions pas que nous étions dans la lecture initiale des enfants. La lecture initiale des enfants, ça veut dire que les enfants venaient juste de rentrer à l'école, ils n'avaient pas encore une maîtrise en français, donc ils comprennent bien leur langue. Et à travers ce que le parent leur montrait, ils regardaient les images, des fois ils regardaient les écritures, ils pointaient du doigt les écritures et ils arrivaient à lire et à déchiffrer quelque chose. Et le parent était en mesure de lui dire non, ça c'est une banane, c'est pas une pomme, etc., etc. Et ça, l'enquête sur les connaissances, les attitudes et les pratiques a pu montrer que les parents, qu'il y avait des changements réels dans le cadre de ce programme-là, sur les résultats. Alors, je vois une autre question. Je peux avancer sur cette question? Je vois une autre question pour dire comment est-ce que nous arrivons à expliquer. Je pense qu'on parle de l'outil école-maison.
Yes,
Voilà, voilà. L'outil école-maison, c'est un outil qui a été élaboré pour montrer un peu comment les enfants arrivaient enfants arrivaient à lire des mots, pas des mots, mais des lettres d'abord, des syllabes, association des lettres, et après les mots et même les phrases. Ils arrivaient à comprendre. Alors, il y avait des cadres où on mettait le blanc, on disait que l'enfant ne savait pas encore lire. Et si l'enseignant coche pour dire aux parents, cet enfant ne peut pas lire sur la couleur blanche, ça veut dire que le parent doit faire encore des efforts pour pouvoir aider son enfant à lire. Si ce sont des lettres ou bien des syllabes ou des mots. Par exemple, si l'enfant progresse, il y a une autre couleur qui intervient. Cette couleur-là montre à l'enfant que, voilà, petit à petit, il est en train de forger sa lecture. Alors, le parent, donc, il est motivé lui-même, le parent, parce qu'il se dit, OK, mes efforts ont apporté quelque chose. Donc, si l'enfant progresse pour aller encore dans une autre couleur, ça veut dire que l'enfant est émergent. Ça veut dire que ça continue comme ça pour découvrir les lettres, les syllabes, les mots jusqu'à la compréhension des phrases. Alors, ça, c'est important parce que l'enseignant, tous les 15 jours, il arrive à faire une évaluation rapide, vraiment très simple, sur une méthodologie très simple pour aider les parents à comprendre. Et là, le parent, quand il signe, le 15 jours, quand il signe, il ramène l'outil à l'école. En ce moment-là, il parle avec l'enseignant aussi. L'enseignant peut lui expliquer réellement ton enfant, c'est parce que ça et ça et ça et ça. Et donc, il y a cette communication-là entre l'outil et l'école et la maison. C'est bon, je peux avancer sur l'autre question? La dernière question, je pense. Je ne vois pas trop sur mon écran.
Let's pause there.
Hein? What?
Let's pause there and we'll go to catch-up clubs. And if we have time,
Voilà.
we will come back.
Voilà.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. I
Ah,
love
OK, d'accord.
making those formative assessments very tangible with the colors and the constant communication with parents and caregivers. It's fantastic. All right, we are going to move over to catch-up clubs, and I'm going to summarize a few of the questions here. We had quite a few questions about timing of the catch-up clubs. First was why 3 months? The second was how did you maintain engagement over those 3 months? And then were the catch-up clubs implemented during school breaks, weekends, after school, etc.? Thank you.
I can speak to that. So we generally propose catch-up clubs to be outside of school hours. That's very specific to each context. The team will work with schools, the ministry, and local partners to see, well, what works best for that context. There's cases where it's been implemented in the holidays, but generally we would emphasize it. We're not trying to replace children's time in regular school. And the principle kind of underlying that is that we need to boost the time that these children have to practice their reading skills. Because those children who are furthest behind often may face a kind of inequity of time and support that they've had for their reading. So it's really about finding a space outside of the regular school hours where we can boost that. The 3 months, that's based on just the evidence that we've gathered on kind of the dosage that really seems to have an impact, as Maya presented, it does seem to be enough. So it's a total of about 30 sessions spread out over those months so that children have and facilitators have a chance to kind of rest in between rounds of sessions. But it seems to be that that dosage of 3 rounds of about 10 or 12 sessions is enough to really boost those children's reading levels, so then they can effectively participate in class and learn with the regular curriculum. I'll leave it there for now. Oh, I think, sorry, there was a question about how we maintain motivation. It hasn't really, like, dropout rates have been pretty low in most of the contexts where we've had catch-up clubs. And I think that speaks to what we emphasize about using play-based activities. We have smaller groups. We really build a sense of bonding and play in those groups. So it's kind of an intrinsic motivation that children get, and they also experience a sense of success. That's a key principle of catch-up clubs, is that children need to experience a sense of success early, and success is motivating. So when they feel that they're able to read more and more, that keeps them coming back.
Great, thank you. I'm actually going to pass it back to the synthesis team for a general question, and any of the other presenters can feel free to answer as well. Community and parental support is crucial in improving reading skills of learners as they're passing most of the time at home and in the community. How can it be ensured? So speak a little bit to accountability across the case studies that you guys researched, please. Kathleen or Stephen, do you want to come off mute? Speak a little bit about accountability across programs.
Hey, yeah, sure. So accountability, I think the biggest thing that we see is that the accountability kind of goes 2 ways. One is accountability of the program to the parents and communicating to the parents, like to report to, but also with that engagement with the parents increases the accountability that parents have to support their children, right? And so it kind of goes 2 ways, and we really find effectiveness of interventions that have established that relationship consistently over time and communicating, and through a variety of ways, right? It's not just here's a sort of report or status of how your children are. Sometimes it's radio programming. Sometimes it's also, community meetings and what have you. So I think that really that there's that the relationship both ways. Back to you.
Great, thank you. Do any of the other case study examples want to speak to accountability? Okay, I'm going to move back to Literate Village. Jihan, did the project conduct a CAP study? Was there any focus on local languages?
Thank you for the question. Yes, the project did CAP study, what we call it household survey. And this was conducted with mothers to assess the CAP of those mothers after they spent with us the whole program, which is 15 months, the journey. Yes, so the answer is yes, and the results of this CAP study proved that there is significant impact on the literacy of the mothers and their attitudes and the level of their support to the learning of their kids and how they are involved and engaged in that as a result of the 15 months journey they spent with us. Of course, that's just to give an idea about the scope of our project. We're talking about 60,000 mothers and something like that of children. So it's happening. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. All right, Rokaya and Valerie, speak a little bit more about the tools that you used, for example, maybe Bloom, to produce books in the national languages. Thank you.
OK. Nous avons tenté avec Bloom, mais cette composante, c'était une composante qui a été prise en charge par ceux qui devaient élaborer les manuels scolaires. Et donc, c'est ARED qui s'en chargeait. Nous n'avons pas tout à fait, ils n'ont pas tout à fait utilisé Bloom, mais Bloom a beaucoup aidé dans le cadre du travail qu'ils ont fait pour élaborer le matériel didactique. Parce que le matériel didactique qu'ils ont élaboré, c'était aussi de des scénettes, des petites histoires pour aider un peu, renforcer la lecture des enfants en dehors de l'école, ou bien même que l'enseignant pouvait utiliser dans le cadre de la classe pour raconter des histoires et faire aimer la lecture. Mais je n'ai pas vu quelque part Bloom qui a été utilisé d'une manière très concrète, surtout dans le cadre de la composante que je dirigeais. C'est sûrement ceux qui pouvaient répondre, c'est sûrement ceux qui étaient en train de se charger, la composante qui se chargeait des enseignants et de l'élaboration du matériel didactique. Voilà, c'est la réponse que je pouvais donner.
Thank you. All right, one last question, and I'm going to combine two questions for the Catch-Up Club team because I think they're just clarifying questions, so they should be quick. The first one is, what incentives were used for volunteers and the people who implemented the program? And the second clarifying question is a little bit more about the link to university with the Catch-Up Clubs. How did you follow up with educators who learned the approach at university? And then if the clubs were community-led, what was the connection with universities? Thank you.
Thanks, that's a great question. So in terms of incentives, again, that varies according to context, but broadly speaking, I would say there are two kind of types of motivation that we found for community learning facilitators. One was more intrinsic, so we found kind of groups, people who were motivated by the mission of education and kind of social change. So community associations are a good example. So they're already kind of supporting child-focused activity. So it's about just offering them another methodology that can really boost children's learning. So a really important part of Catch-Up Clubs is looking at the existing kind of ecosystem of community structures, community associations, volunteer programs, youth programs, and building upon those structures kind of goals and motivations. So that's the kind of intrinsic side. The extrinsic side would be more if people saw this as an opportunity to further their career. So sometimes there would be youth who were interested in going into teaching, and this would really help them kind of get a place in the teacher training program or a teacher placement. And in the case now with the universities in El Salvador, it's just part of their teacher practicum, so they have to do a teacher practicum anyway. So the question on universities is, how do we follow up with those teachers? So we're kind of right in the middle actually of just beginning that process. So they're about to start the implementation through the teacher trainees. So it's really going to be through the university itself. So we'll be working with the university to carry out observations and to kind of, they will have to do some kind of coursework where they're building out more materials to use in Catch-Up Clubs. So based on that, they will kind of be graded and given kind of certification of their practicum hours. So the idea is to just embed it within the university system, and that way there'll be some kind of continuity and follow-up embedded. And in terms of like universities and communities, I mean, that is a bit of a shift away from the community-led model that we're seeing in El Salvador, and we've seen that as part of the process of just being able to scale at national level. But I think there's still the potential for collaboration with communities there in terms of the spaces where catch-up clubs can be. They can still be implemented within community spaces. Those associations can still contribute to the activities through the space, through materials, and even joining the sessions, but it's just to make sure that we can identify and train facilitators at scale. The university platforms proving a bit easier. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Great. I love the idea of the whole community supporting education. So not only teachers and students, but also parents, caregivers, community libraries, the university systems that train teachers. I also think that it would lead very well to teacher retainment as they feel that support around them. Thank you all so much for your questions, and thank you to our presenters. We hope you've had a wonderful time learning about the ways to support the community in reading development in students. If you're interested in other Global Reading Network events, resources, and information sharing, there's a couple of ways you can engage with us. You can become a member by joining our listserv, or you can join our LinkedIn groups, and you can keep an eye out for our next networking session. We have one more concluding poll for you about what you thought of the event, and if you could take that before you close all of your windows, we would appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to hear from you again soon.